Stokes. I'm Dwayne McNally, and we've been doing some research and looking at some pieces to be able to bring this conversation to you guys. Um, just so you know, it's finally cool in Texas, so I'm wearing a sweater for the first time this year, and other people around me are wearing short sleeves and shorts, and so it's just what happens in Texas. But hopefully, you guys are having a great fall. And really, the thing that we know is we're beginning to kick off the end of year. Many of you guys have already deep probably into end of year-end giving strategies, and we want to help you enhance those. And potentially, if you haven't had a chance to dig deep in yet, we want to give you some thoughts in which to get started with. And so we've got, if you have questions or anything that you want to put out there, feel free to put them in the chat or go ahead and use Q&A. We'll take advantage of both of those. And so anyway, welcome. We're glad you're here. We've got some freebies at the end that we want to give you. And I'll just give you a heads up right now. If you're here, Danny Stokes, my counterpart, they are doing some construction in his front yard right now. And they cut his internet cable about 3 or 10 minutes ago. And so if he drops out, it's because his phone internet is not strong enough for all the bandwidth that Danny brings, which is easy to understand. So anyway, great for you guys are here today, and we really want to dig into this. And and just so you can see a picture of both of us, Dwayne and Danny. So Danny, I'm going to let you take it away from there.
Awesome, man. It's really, really good to be with you guys today. I appreciate you taking some time out of a busy season right now to spend with us on this hour webinar. I know you guys are trying to get ready for year-end stuff and you're trying to think about strategies and you're trying to do all of your end of the year finance, the regular stuff that you do on top of year-end stuff. And so we know there's lots of webinars, lots of newsletters, lots of things that are going on out in our community right now. And we just really, really appreciate you guys being with us today. And thank you for taking some time. We hope this is going to be valuable to you. We're going to give you some, as Dwayne said, some freebies at the end that we think you can literally take away and use today if you wanted to. So our goal for today is to equip you to align your generosity strategy with this spiritual openness that we're seeing out in the literally across the world today, especially among Gen Z, millennials, even younger ages. And we'll talk some more about this in just a little bit, while engaging the higher givers at the exact same time. So let me just kind of get started with some fun today. I'm going to ask this question. You can throw this in the chat if you want to. I don't know that any of you are going to get this, but let me just challenge you with this. What do Brad Pitt, Oprah, Barack Obama, and our very own Dwayne McNally all have in common? Give you a second. Dwayne, what do you think? Do you have some ideas
I
on
don't,
this? Do you think that
well, I know the answer, obviously, Danny, but I look at that and I'm like, phew, that's not a list that I'm typically associated with or necessarily like, oh my gosh, I'm happy to be associated with them, but it's very real. And so, Danny, I'll let you throw out what the real answer is.
Yeah, way to go, Brian. It has to do with your birthday. Yeah, all of these folks, these wonderful people, these illustrious people, fall into this demographic of Generation Jones. Okay, Generation Jones. And I'll just say, many of you probably haven't even heard of this new generation, but I didn't hear about it until just a few weeks ago. I was at a conference and they had some breakout sessions on Gen Jones. So we've got some fun stuff we want to share with you about who we believe to be a very interesting demographic as we think about year end. So let me give you a little bit of background about Gen Jones as we kind of dive into this. So there seems to be this lost generation between baby boomers and Gen X. And it's the ones that we're calling Gen Jones. They're born between 1954 and 1965. And so right now they're between 60 and 71 years old. And if you were to just kind of split the boomers right in half, it's the younger aged demographics of our boomers. And Dwayne, just a couple weeks ago when we were talking about our content for today, I told you a little bit about what I'm learning about Gen Jones. And you happen to fall in this category as we just learned. And you said, you know what, that's right. I don't really relate to boomers in a lot of ways. So talk to us about that.
So, Danny, as I thought about it, One is that I'm actually relatively tech savvy. If I talk to a lot of the older boomers, that's not necessarily who they are. So tech savvy is a part of that part. I'm also somebody who right now is still actively engaged in work or other activities. And so I think there's a lot of that's in there, Danny, that makes me different than somebody who is 75 years old or whatever might be the older component of that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So you guys hang with us for just a second here because we really are going somewhere by digging into a little bit deeper information about who Jen Jones is. So as we said, between 1954 and 1965, they're between 60 and 71 years old right now. And guys, what we want to point out is that this is a very affluent generation. Okay, so think about that for just a second. At their age, they've had most of their adult lives to generate wealth, to pay off their mortgage, to have their retirement accounts grow. And it's just this time of life when they're coming out of the peak earning potential out in the marketplace as well. And so these guys are very affluent. The other thing that we wanted to point out here is that they're very open to persuasive marketing, very open to persuasive marketing. And what we mean by that is that there's this idea that boomers and that whole generation that they don't know their way around a computer, that they don't use their phones much, that they have to ask their kids for help all the time for technological stuff. And what we've learned and what we're learning is that just does not apply specifically to Jen Jones. They do know their way around a computer and they are very digitally literate. And so they're open to persuasive marketing. And guys, here's the point for this part of our webinar today. You can write this down if you want to, but if we're not discipling this older generation, if we're not finding creative ways and taking the initiative to disciple Jen Jones, other people in their community are going to ask them for their resources. Their alma mater is going to ask. The United
And,
Way is going to ask.
and Danny, let me just correct you on something. You said older generation. That's not true for me. It may be mature generation, but older generation just isn't applicable in this conversation, please.
I'm so sorry, Dwayne. I'm so sorry about that.
I'm sensitive. You hit my sensitive side.
Oh, that's so awesome. But yeah, so just know that most of the research that you're going to find online around Jen Jones is that, their consumer habits, their consumer behavior. And what we're trying to say is there's something deeper there, that they have this deep desire to help others. And while they may have buried it for a few years, they never really disconnected from the idealism of their childhood. And so let's go even farther. Let's go into some history of Jen Jones. They were raised in the height of the post-World War II era and this new American dream. And it's this whole idea of giving back and helping and humanitarianism. The famous speech from JFK, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And so they just had instilled in their younger years this idea that coming out of the war, it's our responsibility to pitch in and to help and to give back and to serve and to be a part of that in our communities. So just some fun stuff. Jen Jones grew up in this childhood of the Beatles and Mary Poppins and Scooby-Doo. And as they grew a little bit older into their teen years, Farrah Fawcett, Pink Floyd, and Saturday Night Fever were all their age. And Dwayne, I won't ask you if you had a Farrah Fawcett poster in your room. I'm not going to do that.
And I appreciate that. Danny, just to be clear, I did not, but I do remember anyway, we'll move on. Keep moving on.
Yes, yes, yes. So Jen Jones, as they grew into young adulthood, Bruce Springsteen, Sony Walkman, and New Coke, man, what a failed attempt that was. But anyway, and then finally, as adults, all you have to do is go back and watch reruns from David Letterman in the early 90s, and you're going to get a really clear picture of who Jen Jones is and what they experienced as an adult and what they're experiencing as adults. So, all that to give you some history from this very interesting demographic of Jen Jones. So, what we did was we took all this information and we went and kind of dug around in Mortarstone, and we found some very interesting things that we wanted to share with you today. So, Mortarstone data shows that for many churches, the givers between the age of 60 to 69 were the highest average givers over the last 12 months. So let that sink in for just a second. You can go look at your church's data literally after this webinar and go to giving breakdown by age and slide down and just see if it's true for you and your church that these 60 to 69-year-olds most likely are going to be the highest average givers for your church. And if they're not the number one, they're probably the number two. Okay. So we're seeing this to be true on the mortar stone side. They're also represented across all the demographics as high givers. So if you go into your core givers into Mortarstone, you're probably going to see a strong representation among the 60 to 69 demographic, and even obviously your top givers, as well as looking at the generational information in Mortarstone. So yeah, Dwayne's put this slide up right now. This is from one of our demo churches, and we just wanted to show you what this looks like. So if you slide down to that 60 to 69 age group, and then look 2 or 3 columns over to your right, you're going to see that for this particular church, they are in fact the highest giving demographic among all of them as far as their average giving goes. And so, guys,
and the key in that, Danny, is it's not the largest group, but it is the group that is giving the largest.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So it becomes very interesting to us at the year end. So we want to learn about these guys, and we want to make sure we're communicating with them. And so, speaking of that, one of the things that we wanted to share with you today as a freebie is at the very end of our time here, we're going to talk about some freebies that you can use today, this weekend, and moving forward as you plan for year end. But one of those is a template that is an email you could send to your 60 to 69-year-olds heading into the year end. And you guys know this, but anything in Mortarstone that's highlighted as in blue, that blue color. So for 60, 69-year-olds, that 111, that's the number of households that give that are in that age group. If you just click on that blue hyperlink right there, it's going to bring up that actual list of 111 households. And from that, you can either save that to a list in Mortarstone and begin to email, communicate directly with this group, or you can save it to a CSV file and go use SurveyMonkey or whatever email distribution software your church uses. But again, at the end of our time today, you could take this email template, slide it into Mortarstone, and send that out today, and that might take you 10 minutes. So we want to help you with some practical stuff there. So Jen Jones, that is who they are, and we have this unique opportunity to reach them for year end that we don't want to miss. And just remember, as we kind of head out of this particular section right here, if we're not discipling these guys, if we're not taking some initiative and figuring out how to build a relationship with them to leverage their resources for the kingdom and to disciple them to kingdom initiatives, there's going to be lots of other people that are. So let's get in there and build relationship. All right, Dwayne. So we've spent all this time talking about Jen Jones, this not older, but more mature demographic, I think is what you said.
Well played, Danny. Yes, exactly. And that's important.
Yeah. So what about Gen Z?
So what about Gen Z, Danny? Well, there's a lot of information that's coming out on that right now. And if you haven't really taken a look at what's going on with the younger generation, I think one of the things that for the longest time, there was those millennials, those Gen Zs, all these things. But the thing that we see happening, and, Danny, I know you've talked a lot about the series that Carey Nieuwhof did recently on Gen Z. And the thing that we know is that there's we call it here the revival generation. There is something afoot in this generation that the connection back to the church. And I think the interesting thing for me when I look at it is the fact that it's not young women who are driving that, it's young men who are driving that. And it's not young men going to any church, it's young men going to churches that are focused on discipling them, engaging them, and helping them grow in their walk with Christ. And so it's a really interesting time as we look at what's going on and believe that God is doing something in this generation. And so the thing that we see is, the long-term decline in attendance And so they're not necessarily attached to attending the church as much as they are there's growing in their personal commitment to Jesus. And so, and that will come through the church, but they're not coming to come to church. They're coming because they are committed to following Jesus. And that's really the conversation about it. It's not about an institution. It's not, and that's one of the things I love about this. And, it's one of those things, Danny, I know my church has got a smattering of younger generation people in it. And when I watch them worship on Sunday morning, when I see them engage in things, it's really encouraging, but also challenging to me personally, because I see their deep connection to Jesus in those moments that I have forgotten about in a lot of those things. And so anyway, I think it's really fun to see what's going on in the Gen Z space. But there's also, so as we look at that, there's just, as we've talked about, there's a lot of things in there. And Danny, I know you've got some stories, a story as well, as far as some things that you see taking place in younger generations.
Yeah, I just want to highlight what you said about the Carey Nieuwhof podcast. If you guys are interested in hearing about not maybe just what's happening from maybe I heard about this or whatever, but if you want to learn really what's going on in the United States and around the world, I would encourage you to go to the Carey Nieuwhof podcast and listen to that August series that he did on revival. He did 2 or 3 or 4 podcasts, I can't remember, but it's great information and very practical. And I'll tell you, man, this is really personal to me. The revival is very personal to me for a couple reasons. One, because I've been a part of a church in our community that's a startup, and just a few weeks ago, they worked really hard and did some promotion in the community and got into some of the high schools, and they launched student ministry for the first time in our little community. And 750 middle school and high school students showed up on the very first night. So there is a hunger that we haven't seen in years. And my 9-year-old daughter goes to a Christian school that's just right down the street. And 2 weeks ago, she came home and was kind of him-hawing around and said, "I've got big news." And I was like, "Tell me what your big news is." And I thought she was going to tell me, she got a lollipop or something. And she said, "Hey, today I accepted Christ." And 18 of our third graders in this Christian school have said yes to Jesus over the last 3 weeks. And they sent out an email saying, "Hey, there's some revival that's going on in the school." So, man, I'm seeing it in my family. I'm seeing it in my church. I'm hearing about it from other people that I connect with through Mortarstone. God's up to something. He's doing something here. So something's happening with this younger generation right now.
Yep. And so I think it's, we talked about Jen Jones and that they have the largest, they're the largest givers for the most part. They're engaged, but we also know that Gen Z, and we'll show another screenshot here shortly, is not who that is. And we have to recognize Gen Z are people who are just coming out of college, many, or in their first jobs. We know that most of them don't own homes. The average age of first-time home buyers is in the mid-30s. And so there's all these things that are going on in the Gen Z. And we also know that it's if you've looked at our annual report from last year, we know that Gen Z it takes 10 Gen Zs to replace, hard to say, 10 Gen Zs to replace one boomer's giving. And it's not the fact that may always stay that way, but back to Danny's point earlier is the question is who's going to be discipling them? What steps are we going to take as the church to do that? And so, what we see is by far the Gen Z age 13 to 28 is the smallest giving demographic. Makes sense. We know that it takes 10 to replace one boomers. But what we're seeing, though, is a higher participation by younger adults with a lower average gift. And so as we look at this, and when we first started talking about this, one of the questions that came up was, does Gen Z participate in end-of-year giving campaigns? Was kind of the hypothesis that they don't. And so we went out to Mortarstone and did some look backs at average giving over a couple different months, and then last year, and then comparing it to December last year. And what we saw was they participated and were highly engaged in end of year giving last year, but they couldn't give and they don't give at the same levels as as older generations. And so it's important for us to recognize the fact of, yeah, they are by far of the active older generations, the lowest amount of giving, average giving, but they are growing and their numbers are increasing across the board. And so the key question as we go through this is how do we leverage end of year giving to help them take their next step in chasing Jesus, but also contributing and releasing their hold on money. And so the best part about it is if we can help a Gen Z person understand that God owns it all and that it's about their heart, not about their giving, that sets them up for a trajectory that will be an incredible story for the rest of their lives. So, Danny, let's do a poll. And
Let's do it.
interesting question about where did you learn about generosity, stewardship in the church? And so giving you 4 options there. Danny, I know you have a story. I'll just say my story was what I learned from my parents about generosity, about giving, was watching them putting a wadded up bill into the plate as it passed by on Sunday morning. It took going to a Promise Keepers event when I was in my 30s to where I actually understood the truth about generosity. And so that's what it was for me. So would love to have everyone vote. But Danny, tell your story while people are voting.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I love it that you got challenged with stewardship and generosity from a Promise Keepers event. Like that was a huge movement in our not too distant past. So that's amazing. You know, for me, if I look at my growth in stewardship over the years, it's been up and to the right. But when I think about the earliest times that I learned about this, I have a memory from whenever I think I was about 9 years old, and it's just like it was yesterday. So I remember in our house at that point, whenever I was growing up, we had a little kitchenette, and there was a desk in that kitchenette, and every single Sunday morning, I remember seeing my dad go into that little kitchenette, sit down at the desk, and pull out a checkbook and write a check. And I had no idea what giving was or what that meant back in those days. And so one day I walked in, I was like, "Hey, what are you doing in here?" And he sat me down and he explained, like, "Hey, this is what we do in the Stokes household. We're gonna tithe because this belongs to the Lord. And every Sunday you see me come in here and I write this check because this is what we do. We're gonna take this today on to church and we're gonna drop it in the basket when it comes by." And he started giving me a dime and said, "Hey, when the basket's passed, when the plates are passed, I want you to put this dime in and you get to participate this way." So my earliest memories, 9, 10 years old, were of my dad telling me about generosity and stewardship. And I know that's not for everybody. Everybody doesn't have that story. But it is for me, and we're very curious to know what it is for you guys.
All right, Danny, look at that. 50% said their parents, 23% said their small group or a series at church, somebody who discipled them, challenged them, and almost 20% said they studied it on their own. And so a lot of different varieties of things. You know, the question, you know, if we asked a question now of who's doing the same for the younger generations in your church, that'd be an interesting question to ask, because I think that's one of the key questions that we keep trying to encourage and challenge churches on is what's discipleship look like for the younger generations? Because we know a lot of parents it's not part of a lot of parents' approach to doing it. And frankly, Danny, I love the fact that you watched your dad write checks. The recurring giving that comes out of your checking account today or out of your credit card off your credit card doesn't teach anything about ongoing generosity to a lot of kids. And so it actually takes an extra step that you were able to get because of what you saw more so than what someone taught you.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It takes some intentionality, that's for sure. And you're right, that's what we're talking about today. So,
Yeah.
hey, we really want to kind of take it back to the theme of our webinar today. And so we've been talking about Jen Jones, this wiser, mature generation, you know, from 60 to 71 years old. we've been talking about Gen Z and even younger and the revival that's happening there. And so you may be wondering, okay, there's lots of information out there. There's lots of webinars, lots of things that are out about year end. Why in the world did you guys pick those two specific demographics to talk about? And we're going to answer that question in just a second because we found some very unique similarities that we think are very unique to these two demographics. And we want to make sure we highlight that as we approach year end. But before we do that, as we were preparing for this webinar, we found something very interesting. And it's this note from Paul to his protege Timothy, this young pastor Timothy, as he was pastoring his church. And this is what Paul tells Timothy. He says, teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not trust in their money, which is so unreliable. Their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. Tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works and generous to those in need, always being ready to share with others. By doing this, they will be storing up their treasure as a good foundation for the future so that they may experience true life. And so, what the theologians tell us is that Paul was probably in his mid 50s or so when he wrote this, and Timothy would have been in his late 20s. And so, right here in front of us, you have discipleship from somebody that would have been Gen X heading into this, Gen Jones demographic, mentoring, discipling, walking alongside, pouring into Timothy, who was a Gen Z. And so we just think this is a great biblical model, a great biblical example for us to follow as we engage the younger generation to talk about stewardship. And it's right there in front of us. You may be like, well, man, how do we talk about this to these younger generations? Paul tells you right there. He gives you four very specific things to do as we disciple this age group. So we just wanted to highlight that today and then issue this challenge of, just as we said earlier, if we're not discipling and engaging Gen Jones, then other people are going to be engaging them. And if we're not discipling and being intentional with Gen Z and younger, then we're going to miss a tremendous opportunity. So we challenge y'all. We challenge you today to walk away from this webinar and start thinking about how are we going to step into, walk alongside, and challenge and disciple our younger generation. So, okay, now let's go back to why we picked those two in the first place. So even though Gen Jones and Gen Z are far apart in age, they share some surprising similarities that matter to us as we approach year end. Okay, so 4 or 5 things here. One is both of these demographics are skeptical of institutions. And Dwayne, we talked about this the other day, but I don't think it's just, Gen Jones and Gen Z. I think a lot of people are skeptical of, quite honestly, the church. And I live here in the DFW area, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and there are a number, unfortunately, of churches who are experiencing failures from their lead pastor, and it just creates a general distrust. And so, you want to speak to that?
No, I totally agree with you on that, Danny. And I think the key is the fact of I think Jen Jones has a higher degree of trust of institutions than Gen Z does, or Jen Jones does than Gen Z. But I think that over the years we've seen that the trust of organizations, institutions overall, because the older baby boomers didn't go through the massive layoffs that many of the Gen Jones did over the years that lost those pieces. We did. So there's a lot of things that took place that drove skepticism of institutions.
Yeah. There's a long road that got us to where we are today in our culture. And, a couple of things you can do about that. We may talk some more about this if there's time at the end, but if you have an annual audit, man, find some subtle ways to get that in front of your congregation. If you have an elder that can do an offering moment in a Sunday service, or just slow drip emails that go out reminding people that the church has an audit at the end of the year, and those financials could be available if people wanted to see them. If you are a member of ECFA, if that's a part of your church culture and you've been through that process, then putting that seal, that ECFA seal on your website and letting people know that, hey, when you give here, we're intentional about this and we get audited and we have guidelines and we follow the rules here. So just some subtle ways that you can keep that in front of people. Another
Hey, Danny, I was
similarity
just going
between
to
these.
Hey, Danny, I was just going to say I was meeting with the church earlier this morning, and the conversation came up regarding putting this information on their site. And they said, "Yeah, we post our audited financials on the web page, and then we put a timer on it. If anyone spends more than 20 minutes in it, we add them to our finance committee team." So, that's one way of gathering people who obviously have an interest in finances. But anyway, just that's an insider tip for you, Danny.
Yes, so that's great. I will not be going to our church's website to spend 20 minutes on the financials. So thank you for that tidbit there. Okay, so another bullet point that we wanted to talk about that's similar between these two is they both want to see how giving changes lives. And this is the eternal challenge if you're in stewardship or finance or if you're an executive pastor is how can we continue to pay staff salaries and keep the lights on and pay for our facilities and yet still keep these stories of life change in front of our people. And you have to find a balance between both of those. But right now, these two demographics specifically, they love to see these video testimonies and they love to see measurable outcomes. Relational communication is what they want. So that's another thing. Three, a third bullet point here, they both respond to relationships, not just transactions. And so the occasional handwritten thank you note, um, personal updates when it's possible. I'm hearing more and more people that will follow up with a first time giver with a thank you text. They immediately get that on Monday after they give on Sunday. And you know what? Like, man, getting face to face and going to have lunch or coffee with some of your people, man, get some of those on your calendar between now and year end and just make some of this communication face to face.
Yep.
Another
And,
one,
and when
both.
you're having lunch with them, just ask them simple questions about what did it feel like after they gave their first gift? What's it look like? What's their generosity journey? I mean, just some simple conversations like that to move beyond because, Christmas is something where people tend to be more generous and more engaged in that conversation. So why not leverage those conversations in that moment?
100%. That's great. Yep. Another one is so they both are reachable digitally, although in very different formats. And so we talked earlier about Jen Jones and how there's this idea that they're not digitally literate, and that's not just not true. They are, but it may look a little bit different when you compare how they're going to give and how they're going to engage versus a Gen Z. And so that older demographic, that wiser demographic, Dwayne, they're going to want some time to plan their gift. And so communication is going to be key there. They're probably going to use your church's website. They're going to be more apt to use like an ACH gift versus, a QR code or something like that. They're also going to be at that point in life where it's going to be beneficial for them to start thinking about giving from their IRAs versus their checking account. And so qualified charitable distributions at 73, and there's rules around that. We can help educate our givers to not only engage in kingdom activity, but to save themselves some tax as well. So that's kind of what we're going to be thinking about here is, okay, how can we approach both through a thoughtful plan for your end, planned giving, IRAs, QCDs, using ACH, but then for the younger generations, we want to make sure that your church is using Apple Pay and Venmo and text to give and QR codes and the tap to give technology. Those are going to be the spontaneous opportunities that Gen Z is going to want to take advantage of. And then finally, this last one on the list, both dislike manipulative giving methods. And who does like a manipulative giving method? None of us do. And so we're going
Definitely
to
not the
focus on.
old, not definitely not the mature, wiser generation, Danny.
That's exactly right. So we're going to focus on vision. We're going to focus on mission and discipleship versus obligation. This is not a hand in the back. This is shining a flashlight for the path
Mhm.
ahead and inviting everybody into something that's just very meaningful and outside of themselves, something kingdom oriented. And that's going to be a much better approach for these two demographics as well as all the others. So, Dwayne, you want to start to wrap this thing up and head us down a path?
And as we do that, let's do another poll. What's the hardest part of building a year-end giving campaign for your church? So Danny, talk tell us about something that your church has done traditionally at end of year, because
Yeah,
you guys have done some really fun stuff.
I want to challenge everybody to do what a lot of the nonprofits are doing right now, and that's take advantage of Giving Tuesday. I don't know how many of you have a year-end initiative that you ask your folks to give for specifically, whether it's, hey, we're going to launch campuses or we're going to feed more hungry people or whatever it is. But we are seeing out in the nonprofit world a tremendous uptick over the last few years in Giving Tuesday. And that's not the purpose of our webinar today, but just a challenge to at least go explore that and to see if it might work for your church.
That's great, Danny. And I know what my church has done for years is pick a special issue that's in our community that we want to help solve. And so we do a offering on Christmas Eve at the Christmas Eve services, and every dollar that comes in goes out to these special um, items in the community, and so different nonprofits or whatever. And so it's driven a lot, but it also gives people a simple space, a simple place to start the giving and generosity journey. So if we can see the results of the poll, let's take a look at that. All right. So clarity of impact, timing, and developing a campaign, Danny, look like the biggest challenges that that is out there. It looks like most people have solved the ease of giving and have a pretty good sense of how different generations give. But now it's just a matter of how do we tell the stories, right?
Right. Yep.
So let's talk about it, because we know that end of year resonates with all generations. As I said, we took a look at our data because we thought maybe not, but it actually does. And so we've already talked about this, and this is what we just talked about, is leading with life change, not pressure. As Danny said, people aren't wanting to give out of obligation. People will, but what captures their heart is going to capture their wallet. And so how do you create the tell true stories? The stories that, like when we talk about when we gave to a pregnancy resource center, sharing the stories of the women whose lives were transformed by walking through the doors of that pregnancy resource center. Mapping the gifts to outcomes. So what are the things that are taking place in your church that people care about? And it's not necessarily about, people don't want to fund a budget, they want to fund a mission. And so how do you connect their giving to the mission? Another thing that we know, and Danny already talked a lot about this, was lower the barriers to give. So here's the thing I know is the average person there's a guy in our church who I was talking to him recently, and he basically said, I was born with this in my hand. So that's my iPhone. And so for him, every payment type, everything that he pays for, pretty much he does Apple Pay or Google Pay or whatever. And I think that's the piece that, how do we make that easy and accessible to those folks? Because they're not likely to go to a website. Jen Jones is probably going to go to your website. Jen Jones is going to do these other things, but it really is key to helping them understand that we're going to meet them where they're at and do it the way that they do life. Because most Gen Zs have never written a check. So a lot of them have never really even touched a check. And so how do we help make that real? And then in bringing clarity, the why you give now and what your gift accomplishes really helps them attach, and what they're doing makes a difference. And then finally, if you aren't currently segmenting your messages based upon age, giving amounts, and other criteria, you're actually missing some great opportunities. And so, one of the things that we're recommending here, and as Danny showed earlier, you can get a list of any of these age groups or these areas off of our website, or by clicking on the blue numbers next to the demographics. But talking to Gen Zs and millennials about, the gift, the clarity about the gift. giving them a pathway for monthly on-ramps and making it so that they can share it with others and be a part of that journey. Jen Jones, it's all about legacy. It's about impact. For the older ones, they're drawing money out of their IRAs. And so once they hit 70, how do they start to give out of their IRAs instead of giving cash and other things? And I think, as Danny talked about earlier, recognizing that Jen Jones, when they give a big gift, they need time to actually process that, unless they're just giving cash. And really, you want to be talking to them about asset-based giving, not cash-based giving. And then finally, you can do giver screenings and birthday filters to get to further segment the list. And so there's a lot of things that you can do to help people take these next steps. So Danny,
that's
talk
great,
about
Dwayne.
some
Thanks
plug
for
and
sharing all
plays.
that. Yeah, so one of the things that we've done is we've created a landing page at mortarstone.com, and we're going to send you the link and all that good stuff on how to get there. So I know that many of you probably have a very detailed end of year plan that's already in place. You already know a strategy. You're already pointing people to mission and vision, and you've already got all that stuff in place. And some of you, you're going, what is a year-end plan? Like, what do you mean by that? So we want to help everybody today. And so we're going to give you 2 or 3 things that we hope will be really helpful. The first one is that email template that I talked about a little earlier. So you can go into your Mortarstone, go into the generational giving, or go into the aged giving, click on these different demographics that we're talking about. And we're going to send you a template that you can literally update to reflect the terminology and your culture from your church. Add in what you think is appropriate, but you can use that as a template to go ahead and start that communication to your folks for year end. We hope that you'll use that. Another thing that's going to be a freebie for you today is we've taken all the Jen Jones specifics, and we've put together what we think is a very targeted offering moment for that demographic. And so you can take that to your church this weekend. And again, many of you probably already have systems in place for how you communicate on the weekend. But again, you can use this as a starting place on, hey, if we were going to think about how to start talking specifically to the different age demographics within our church, what would be some kind of a rotation on the weekend that we could put together, where one weekend we may talk to the Gen Zs and the next weekend we may talk to Gen Jones. But we've got a template that we think you can literally put your church's name in there and use it on Sunday if you wanted to. And then there's a communications calendar, for people who really don't have a plan right now. We've got a communications calendar that you can literally just put on top of your current church calendar and begin to communicate with folks that way. And then you're going to see these other things here on our just some December ideas for you. How can you think about, these TikTok and YouTube short reels that you can share on your social media accounts, put QR codes, those kinds of things. If you have a donor in your church that might be willing to match a year-end giving season. Earlier, I mentioned that a lot of churches are taking advantage of Giving Tuesday, and that's a great place to have a donor match the funds for that day. Cause funds, Next Gen Discipleship, Local Care, Global Missions. Dwayne, you mentioned that just a few minutes ago. First gift pathways, a kind of a workflow idea, so that when somebody does give for the first time, what's your process for engaging that family? What's your process for getting them so quickly assimilated in the life of your church? And then that those subsequent gifts are going to come if they're serving, if they're in a group, if they're attending on the weekend. So what does that on-ramp look like for first-time givers? And then again, this Jen Jones email that we've referred to.
And Danny, I know that if they can download it, and we'll put the QR code up here shortly, but if anyone wants to get further information or they want to talk to you, that they could just respond back to the email that they'll get of the replay, and we can get you connected with them as well, correct?
That sounds awesome. I'd love to.
Okay, perfect. So, so some of the things that Mortarstone does, and I'll show you some pieces here, is, we actually provide some capabilities to help you understand and help you plan out your year-end campaign. And so, from the standpoint of benchmarking, where do you stand on, what's happening with your age groups, both the age groups and the generations? So being able to understand and look at the different groups, and then know what steps to take is going to be an important aspect of this. Budgeting and forecasting. So we know that churches get typically 16 to 18% of their giving in December. So understanding what the expectation is and being able to say, are we on track? Are we not? What's happening there is something that we can help you define and work through. Giver screening, Danny referred to it earlier, but if you want to go out and figure out, we want to do a special end of year ask of a few folks to do something big. Who do you go and do that with? We can help you identify information based upon, their age, their income, their home value, all those things, and allowing you to target and pinpoint some people that you might want to make a specific ask to. And then finally, just looking at information on your top givers. So understanding who your top givers are, it's always one of those things, Danny, that I love to understand who churches' top givers are, but I'm also interested to see who could their top givers be. And that's typically by looking at other information that we can provide through our feeds from the Social Security or from the Census Bureau, look at median income and everything. And so there's a lot of tools that's here that we would love to help you guys build out a richer strategy. And if you've already got a great strategy this year, but you want to revamp it or look at how could it be improved next year, we want to be a part of that conversation as well. So here's the QR code to get access to the resources. But let's open it up. And Danny, I don't know if you've been watching the chat or the Q&A, but let's open it up for whatever questions might be out there.
Yeah, let's do that. I know Corinne has asked this question about Venmo specifically and how the back end reporting is very difficult even for businesses, and I agree it is. And it's these external sources for giving, the Apple Pays, the Venmos, the Zelles, all that kind of stuff. It is more complicated. I'll tell you, it's easier today than it used to be,
Yep.
but it's still very difficult to do. And what we found was it was worth it. Like to either make that the deciding factor of are we going to offer it or not. We just staffed up to make sure that people could actually go find those reports and do the reporting and the communication that they needed to versus to not do it at all. So you just have to decide for your church if it's worth it or not, or if you can even do it or not.
So Danny, my guess is there was a day when giving by credit card was new and hard. Yet we see that as just a standard part of how it happens today. And so I think we're in that new stage of we have to make that shift. And once we make the shift, it'll just become a part of what happens. And I think that there is, we're used to what is, but the key is the fact of, are we going to meet our givers where they're at or force them to fit into our form and function conversation?
Yeah, that's good. So Roger's asking if we're going to have a link to the landing page on top of the QR code. So Dwayne, I'm assuming we're going to send out an email follow-up that'll have a link to that landing page.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. So yeah, Roger, we'll get that to you whenever the webinar is ready to render, and we can get that back out to you guys.
And I would imagine we'll get the email out to everybody tomorrow.
Awesome.
And so be watching for it, and then feel free to forward it on and share it with others as well. Great. Danny, any other questions out there?
I think, unless I've missed them, I think that's all on the questions.
Okay. Any last minute questions, everybody? Because otherwise, really appreciate you guys joining us. It looks like maybe somebody just asked a question in the Q&A. How do you balance capturing the quick spontaneous giving with obtaining the information about the giver, such as year of birth, so that you can know generations?
Hey, Dwayne, can I take that one?
I was teeing it up for you, Danny.
That is such a great question. And I'll tell you, 90% of the churches that I coach in Mortarstone, you can just see the progression. So if we go look at first-time givers, the birth date information is basically non-existent. And so it's really hard to study demographically what's going on with your first-time givers if you don't have that birth date. But then if you go look at core givers, you get a few more because what's happening is the longer that these people stick around your church, the more opportunity they're going to have to sign up for something or register for something where they're going to have to put their birth date in your database. And then by the time they get to a top giver scenario, most churches will have a ton of birthdays for that. But just quickly, let me say this. When we talked about how you follow up with a first time giver and this idea of a workflow, so for example, let me just quickly cover this. So if you have a first time giver at the church that I'm a part of, within, if you give on Sunday, on Monday, you get an email in your inbox with a thank you video from one of our pastors. And then our system will auto pause for 7 days, and then they get a story of life change in their inbox. So week one, it's, hey, thank you for giving. Week two, it's, you can see that your dollars are already going to work in the kingdom. And then week three, four, five, we continue to send emails, but that fifth email is an invitation to join a distribution list for our church's digital newsletter that goes out every week. And in order to get on that list, you have to put your birth date in. And so that's how we capture a ton of birth dates. That's one way. Another way is you have to think about this as concentric circles. So go to your staff and tell them they have to put their birth date in their profile. And then go to your key serve team leaders and tell them they have to put their birth dates in their profile. And then go to your small group leaders and tell them they have to put their birth dates in their profile. And then have your small group leaders go to their small groups and tell them they have to put their birth dates. And so if you can approach it from a kind of an inside out perspective, you're going to capture a ton more birthdays, and that'll get your data more and more reliable.
And Danny, the other thing that I would say in there is that we at Mortistone are working through some things to leverage some of the tools that we have on the outside to be able to bring so that churches can cross-populate that information. So we are working through some things on the back end, which we're looking forward to doing some things soon with. And I saw a couple of chats and Nikki, part of our team, is on the line here. Nikki, I'm seeing a chat that says the QR code actually goes to a roundtable conversation instead of the end of year resources. And so, folks, apologize for that. And what we'll do tomorrow, when you get the recording, we will make sure you get the ability to go to the right download spot. So we apologize for that.
Great questions, man. If anybody's got anything else here in the last minute or two, we'll be happy to stick around and answer those, but fantastic questions.
Yep. So
All right,
Danny, I think we can probably go ahead and close it out. Folks, it's the end of October. We're heading into two of the most incredible months of the year, focusing on Thanksgiving and also Christmas. Know that we're going to be doing a webinar in November where our very own Tim Dietrich is going to be joining us, and he's going to be talking through, out of our annual report, he's gone and identified a group of churches that are the outliers, the churches that are exceeding and going above and beyond as far as accomplishing their giving and their discipleship. And so Tim's done a lot of research on that, and we're going to have him come in and he's going to share with us some of the core points that any church can implement. And so that'll be an exciting conversation as well. So,
and Dwayne, Nikki just put that correct link up on the webinar chat. So if you'd like to click that before we end the call, you can go grab those resources that way.
Okay, so we'll give it a moment for everyone to go into the chat and to get to the right spot. Danny, great to have you here with me today and to talk through this. And, before you and I start talking about this topic, I didn't know I was Jen Jones. I just thought I was this strange boomer. Well, I'm still strange, so that hasn't changed anything, but I'm no longer just a strange boomer. And Nikki, it looks like. Okay, looks like we're getting it out there. So awesome. But anyway, now I know more about myself than I did before, and I'll make sure to tell my wife about what it looks like to be a Jen Jones.
Be sure and tell your wife that your friend Danny said that you were wise and mature.
Great. Yep. exactly. I will make sure that that's a true statement. And it looks like we still are struggling with our page. So folks, we're sorry about that. We will get this, we will get it solved and off to everybody.
Check your email tomorrow.
Yep. Awesome. All right. All right. The last one works. So we'll give everyone one more shot at clicking it and going from there. Nikki, thank you for that. And folks, thank you for your patience. And Danny, your internet worked great. So you can tell the guys out front to just, hopefully they're done actually fixing your real internet, but you came out okay.
Awesome. Awesome. Man, it was really fun to be with you guys today. I hope that this was helpful to you. And I hope that you found this last hour to be something that was worth your time. So be blessed.
Awesome. Thanks. God bless and